Wildlife Habitat Council Conservation Conference attendees. I hope you're enjoying the event so far. My name is Sam and I'm a Manatee Master here at Manatee Lagoon. For those of you who aren't familiar with our center, Manatee Lagoon is an environmental educational attraction which is located in Rivera Beach, Florida, located in Palm Beach County. Our 16,000 square foot center features engaging, hands-on exhibits where guests can learn about the threatened Florida manatee as well as the natural wonders of the surrounding Lake Worth Lagoon. The center first opened its doors in February of 2016, meaning we are just over 5 years old. We are located next door to Florida Power and Light Company's Rivera Beach Next Generation Clean Energy Center. The water released from this power plant into what we call the Outflow Area next to Manatee Lagoon can be up to 14 degrees warmer than the surrounding waters of the Lake Worth Lagoon. So therefore, during the coldest times of the year, this warm water refuge is a safe place for manatees to hang out and keep warm all winter long. Manatee Lagoon has a team of Manatee Masters like myself who are all students at Florida Atlantic University. We are trained to know all about these gentle giants, and we serve as the center's educators, leading virtual tours, virtual lessons, and other programs throughout the year. It's through this Manatee Master program, as well as our extensive education and outreach efforts, that we've been able to become a Wildlife Habitat Council Gold Conservation Site, which is something that we are very proud of. While the center remains closed to the public due to COVID-19, we've had the opportunity to launch a variety of virtual programs over the last year, reaching manatee lovers from near and far. Today, I'm going to be taking you on a virtual visit to Manatee Lagoon so you can experience all the wonders of manatees and the Lake Worth Lagoon right from where you are. All right, so I'm going to start our virtual tour inside in front of our skeletons, and then we will make our way outside by our outflow area. So first off, our skeletons that you see here behind me are actually real bones. The larger skeleton that you see, her name was Sketchy, and she was about 17 or 18 years old when she died, and she died of a boat strike. Now this younger calf here that you see in front of me was actually killed due to cold stress. So cold stress as well as red tide events are some of the leading natural causes of death in manatees. And then throughout the years, the #1 human-related threat to manatees has been boat strikes. So the manatees that I'm going to be talking to you about today are known as the Florida manatee. Now there are a few other species of manatees and dugongs found throughout the world within a larger group known as the order Sirenia. So there are actually 3 manatee species and 2 dugong species. So the first being the West Indian manatee. Now the West Indian manatee is actually broken up into 2 subspecies, our Florida manatee here, as well as the Antillean manatee that can be found in the northern parts of South America as well as Central America. Now the Amazonian manatee, which you can probably assume is from the Amazon River, is actually a strictly freshwater species. So they live just in the freshwater environment of the river. So our manatees here actually can live in fresh, brackish, and salt water. The Amazonian manatee is also the smallest species of manatees, and they lack fingernails on their flippers. So if you were to see a Florida manatee, you would actually notice that on each flipper they have about 3 to 4 fingernails. Now our Amazonian manatee actually has a little white or pinkish patch along their chest as well. So they're slightly different when you look at them versus our Florida manatee here. Now there's also the West African manatee. The West African manatees along the West African coastlines. There's actually not a lot of information known about them. They're fairly understudied. Now we also have what are known as a dugong. So dugongs are found in the Indo-Pacific region near Australia, and males will actually obtain tusks once they reach sexual maturity. Now our manatees don't have tusks, however our manatees do have molars, and dugongs have molars as well. But what's really the main difference between dugongs and manatees is the shape of their tail. So if you were to look at a manatee's tail, you would see that they have this rounded or paddle-like shaped tail, and dugongs have a forked tail, much like what you would see on a dolphin or a whale. Now one of my other favorite species that are very similar to the dugong is actually called a stellar sea cow. Now the stellar sea cow is actually found up in the Bering Sea, which is very cold water. So it's near Alaska and Russia. So the stellar sea cow is also 30 feet long and about 9 metric tons. So they were very large animals, and they had a lot of fat on their body to help insulate themselves since they lived in that cold water environment. Our manatees don't. Our manatees are found in very sub or tropical type climates, so they live in warm water. Now, the Steller sea cow was actually discovered back in 1741 and was hunted to extinction just 27 years after its discovery. So that was a pretty quick disappearance of our Steller sea cow. So today they are extinct. So let's take a look underwater at Manatee Lagoon to view some of these large marine mammals. On average, manatees are about 10 feet long and weigh about 1,000 pounds. However, they can reach up to 13 feet and around 3,500 pounds. Calves are about 3 to 4 feet when they're born and weigh between 60 and 80 pounds. That's a pretty impressive size. These large animals can hold their breath up to 20 minutes while resting, but they'll come up more often, more like 2 to 5 minute intervals while traveling. So calves do look very similar to adults. They're just smaller. They stay with their mothers for about 2 to 3 years on average, and during that time frame, they will learn everything from where food, warm water, and fresh water is located. Now, manatees typically only have one calf at a time. Twins are rare, but it does happen. It happens actually less than 1% of the manatees will have twins. So it's really exciting when we actually get to witness the event of manatee having twins. Now, they do nurse their young because they are marine mammals, right? So marine mammals, that means they nurse their young, they give live birth, they are warm-blooded, they breathe using lungs, much like we do, and they also have hair. So manatees have very wiry hair, and along their snout, it's called vibrissae. And it's kind of what you might think of or see on your cat or a dog, right? They're much kind of like their whiskers. Now, they do nurse their young, so they have teats, and their teats are actually located under their flipper, or kind of more in that armpit region, which is much like an elephant. It makes sense because an elephant is actually the closest living relative of our manatee. So manatees and elephants have very similar characteristics, a couple being their teats, their fingernails and toenails, right? So I talked a little bit about how manatees have 3 to 4 fingernails on their flippers. If you were to look at an elephant, you would see along their feet, they kind of have their toenails. They also have a prehensile snout. So it's pretty obvious on an elephant, if you were to look at their trunk, right, their prehensile trunk. Our manatees have a prehensile snout, so their lips can actually grab onto seagrass and help guide it into their mouth. Now, they also have very similar dentition, so they both have molars, and manatees will typically just grind on vegetation. That's all they need their molars for. And they are herbivores, so they only eat vegetation, and they eat about 10% of their body weight every day. So for a 1,000-pound manatee on average, that's close to about 100 pounds of seagrass every day. And seagrass is the main source of their diet. They can get other vegetation from mangrove trees, so the leaves on mangrove trees. They can eat other aquatic vegetation like algae. And our manatees grind this up using their molars. So here is a lower jawbone of a manatee, and you can see that all they have are molars. And what's kind of cool is in the front, you can definitely tell that these manatees have really flat, worn down teeth. And then in the back, they're very rigid or more tooth-like. So what happens is as they're grinding on seagrass, sometimes sand, even shells can kind of wear down those teeth. And eventually these teeth in the front will fall out, and they grow in the back, and then they push them all forward like a conveyor belt. And this mechanism is called marching molars. And this is very similar to how an elephant's teeth or dentition are like as well. Now, manatees do need to drink fresh water. They can go up to 2 weeks without drinking fresh water, so it's a pretty long time compared to us, where we can only go up to 3 days without it. But manatees will find fresh water from sources like precipitation, from the freshwater river systems, even ground and stormwater runoff. There is one problem source, however, where manatees will find fresh water, and that is actually from hoses. So hoses along docks, by marinas, or even in canals by houses. But manatees are actually a threatened species, so this means that they are heavily protected. So manatees are protected under the Endangered Species Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, as well as the Florida Manatee Sanctuary Act. So it is 100% illegal to harass a manatee or feed a manatee. And this includes giving manatees fresh water from hoses. So manatees definitely need to rely on their own resources for their own survival. So they have really good memory, which is another reason why we might also correlate that with elephants, right? When we talk about elephants, we probably think of they have really good memory. So manatees remember where to go for certain sources. And a lot of times they'll go to the same place over and over again. And this is what we call site fidelity. This is when they're going to that same place over and over again for that similar resource. So if a manatee is getting fresh water from a hose in a certain area, maybe from a family in a canal by their backyard, that manatee will consistently go to that location for that fresh water. And if that family were to move away, that source leaves with them. So that manatee may still go there expecting the same result, right? So getting that fresh water again. However, that source is no longer there and available to them. So they will have to, move on and find another location. And that obviously can threaten their survival as well, right? If they don't have that source. So it's always best to observe manatees from a distance and also watching their natural behavior. So manatees are also known to be very migratory. During the cold winter months, manatees migrate to the south, with the population being concentrated in Florida. During the colder parts of the year, we typically see manatees gathering at warm water locations within the state, like you see here at Manatee Lagoon. When manatees gather in this manner, it's called an aggregation. However, during the summer months, manatees will spread out and some will travel north, typically as far as the Carolinas, but sometimes they'll go as far north as Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Others may migrate to the west, including towards Mississippi, and sometimes as far as into Texas. We are able to follow some of these large-scale movements by tagging individuals and tracking their movements and their migrations. You can see this individual here has a tag, and I'll talk more about this research when we walk outside. Now, manatees are known to be semi-social, so they're typically fairly solitary, but they do communicate with one another. And they communicate with one another through squeaks and squeals. Now, this type of communication is very common among mothers and calves. And what's really neat is they have signature sounds that they use for one another. So it's much like if you were to walk in a shopping mall and hear a kid yell, "Mom." A lot of moms might turn around, or maybe no one will turn around, right? So it's not very specific. So manatees have this specific call, so they know who's talking to who, or who's trying to communicate with one another. Especially when they're in an area where they're all aggregating for a similar resource, and there's a lot of chatter or sound kind of within the water. Now, typically they're seen in groups of less than 12. Unless they're actually gathering for warm water, where we can see hundreds of manatees all utilizing that warm water resource. So our manatees, once again, they cannot tolerate colder temperatures, right? So cold stress is a major factor when it comes to manatee threats. So they can't tolerate temperatures below 68 degrees Fahrenheit. They don't have blubber, so much like dolphins, whales, seals, they have that nice layer of fat to kind of help keep themselves warm within those cold water environments. Our manatees don't have that, so that's why they need to seek out those warmer waters when it does get cold out. So let's take a look outside and see our outflow area and where the manatees will typically gather in the colder months and learn more about these amazing marine mammals. All right, so welcome to our outflow area. So this particular area is where our manatees will hang out or come to seek that warm water. Now you can see here behind me, we've got our gray pipes that actually put out that warm water into our outflow area. And the seawall along that backside actually heats up quite a bit throughout the day. So that's typically where our manatees will hang out, is on the other side of that outflow. And it's also really shallow, so our lazy individuals can kind of come and lay along the sand and still lift their heads every 20 minutes for that breath. The most manatees we've seen here before, since we've been open, was about 485. But before we were even open, the record number was 581 manatees all within this area. Now, typically when we see these large numbers, it's between January and February. That's just when the water seems to be the coldest. And we'll have all of our manatees hanging out here. Now, throughout the winter time, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, also known as FWC, will conduct aerial surveys to count the manatees statewide and also assess their population. The latest assessment indicated that the Florida manatee population has grown to a minimum of about 7,500 animals throughout the state of Florida. So what's really cool is not only can we see how many manatees are within our state, but we can also do smaller scale projects where we can track our manatee movements using devices like tags. Through these tagging devices, we can learn more about their migratory patterns, reproductive success, their behavior, as well as habitat that is essential for manatee survival. So I'm going to show you what a tag looks like. Now this is a manatee tag. It looks kind of big and bulky. This right here is actually the belt that goes along the peduncle of a manatee, or the kind of skinny part before their fluke or their tail fans out. And that is attached to a nylon tether, which is then attached to the actual tag device itself. So this tag here will actually float in the water behind a manatee, and as they dive underwater, it'll go underwater with them. And then once they come up for air, when this tag reaches the surface, it'll send a signal to the satellite, which will then notify those scientists and researchers where this manatee is located. And this is really cool because we can get some long-term migratory and movement patterns on manatees. Now each one is different, so this tag here has an orange band and some blue tape on top. Now for another individual, this could be completely different. It may have red and green or pink and green. Different types of colorations on the tags can indicate what individual it is. So what's really cool about the tags is they also have what's known as weak links. So if a manatee were swimming along and it got stuck on something, it will actually pull off really easily because they have what are called weak links. And on the tag itself, they sometimes even etch in or write manatee tag, do not touch, because if you were to see a manatee tag on a manatee without knowing what it is, you might think that it's not supposed to be there, right? Maybe like a crab trap or something stuck on the manatee. So a lot of times people will go over and try to pull off the tag, and of course, since it has those weak links, it comes right off. And so then the scientists and researchers lose all that really good, crucial information on our manatee population here in Florida. Now, there's other ways that we can track manatee movements other than actually just using tags, and that is through scar patterns. So manatees can receive scars from boat strikes, cold stress infections, as well as entanglement injuries, and each one has a unique pattern. So even though there's natural variations in traits that exist among the population, this is the most useful way to tell individuals apart. So one individual that I'm familiar with is named Lox, and Lox has a snowman-shaped scar and was actually seen with a calf last year, so we know that this individual is a female. And she's actually been spotted at Manatee Lagoon multiple times, leading to what I mentioned before, the site fidelity, right? So they're coming back to the same location over and over again each year. So scars are a great way for us to track the individuals, especially over time. If we see a manatee here, we can take a photograph of it, and then maybe a year later, we have a researcher, further north along the coast, and they find that same manatee. We know where this manatee has been moving to and from, right? So it's really cool to see how we can track their movements, not only through a physical tag, but also through photo identification. There is a database out there that has photos of manatees, and they're able to track where these manatees are going just based off of them taking photos. Now there's some more new up-and-coming research to track manatee movements, and we are actually, myself, for my research through FAU Harbor Branch, I'll be using drones to follow manatee movements and establish a potentially resident population in the Indian River Lagoon, known as the IRL. And so we're actually using the drones to find specific individuals in certain locations, and we're trying to identify those individuals and see if they're staying all year or if they are migrating during the summertime. So there are certain individuals that are actually relying on that area all year long for food and fresh water. So most of our manatee population does migrate north, but we're trying to actually establish, which individuals don't, and then what they're using all of these habitats for, and also identifying some of that essential habitat for manatee survival. Now, in addition to this, the nonprofit arm of Manatee Lagoon, called Friends of Manatee Lagoon, is working on a multi-year research project in collaboration with their partners at the Clearwater Marine Aquarium Research Institute to use drone technology to look at manatees that stay in the local area near our center during the summer months. Now, drones are a very new technology for studying mammal behavior and movements, There are a lot of exciting research projects that are using drones that are actually in the works and will hopefully help us learn a lot more about these gentle giants over time. So, I talk a lot about manatees, especially seeing manatees here at Manatee Lagoon. However, we don't just see manatees here, and especially during the summertime when we really don't have much to look at, we actually have a lot of other animals that call our little lagoon home. And one of my favorite fish that I commonly see is the sheep's head. Sheep's head have between 5 and 7 black stripes along their bodies and will follow manatees around and eat the barnacles and algae off their backs. They can grow to be around 36 inches long, but we typically see them around 13 inches. Now, other than just sheep's head, we'll see fish like barracuda, jacks, tarpon. We even see animals like eagle rays and even bull sharks. Now, I say sharks, or you might think sharks and manatees. Are there any natural predators? And that would be a great question. Our manatees actually don't have natural predators. Their mechanism, or their defense mechanism, is essentially their size, right? They are so big that nothing is really big enough or wants to expend that energy to go after a manatee, especially going after a manatee may be fatal for that particular individual, like a bull shark or even an alligator, right? Especially in our freshwater springs. So on days when we really don't have manatees here, we still have quite a few fish species. Sometimes even sea turtles will make their way into our lagoon. But during really cold periods, or when we start to get our cold snaps here in Florida, that's when we will start seeing our manatees come in. Now, I do suggest that you check out our live streaming manatee cam throughout the day to check to see if you can spot any manatees, especially during the cold days here in Florida, because it is really exciting when we have hundreds of manatees coming here for that warm water. Thank you for joining us for today's virtual visit to Manatee Lagoon. We hope you enjoyed the program and learned something about manatees. To learn more about manatees and our center, or to register for one of our virtual learning programs, visit our website at www.visitmanateelagoon.com. We also encourage you to stay in touch by following us on Facebook and Instagram. Our social media handle is @Manatee Lagoon. Bye, everyone.